Alright, guys, we are gonna talk for a little bit about Zulu Sangomas. So let me get my notes. What a Zulu Sangoma is a traditional healer, and I think we've talked about, some of the practices that come out of South Africa. I talked a little bit about the Ndebele culture. Ndebele and Shona are probably two groups that you'll hear a lot about, and like the Ndebele language is a dialect of Zulu. But it's not like exactly the same. People from from the Ndebele culture religion, a lot of people practice, let me see, like, they practice, like, ancestors, like, connections to ancestors. Like, I already talked a bit about, some traditional kind of practices that I grew up with, even growing up in the U.S., just kind of like the respect for elders and just kind of that difference of hierarchy and age, and how like younger people are always kind of like serving the older people, and there's definitely this like reverence and respect for people who are older or people who have become ancestors. But because most of my family is Christian, usually once people pass away, there's no other interaction coming up with those people. At least people don't like openly talk about it if they are interacting. But what a Sangoma is they're a spiritual healer, and they talk to the ancestors, and they can get into like a trance state, and people use words like possession or get like taken over by like the ancestral spirits, and they can heal people that way. Let me see. So I wrote these notes, and I don't really know. I think they were for a blog post. So you guys might have to check the blog. I think I didn't actually post it, but I think I had meant to post this on the blog. But there definitely are videos and footage of Sangomas. There's this one, I don't remember. It's like a young guy. He's a young man, a young kid, actually, who is a Sangoma. And he was, like, there's a story about him, and he kind of talks about being, how he, like, kind of was getting called to be a Sangoma, and, he's still living, like, he's still a little kid right now, like, he's not, like, old, but there's a short documentary about him and his mother just kind of being like, okay, I guess, kind of the early phases of the family kind of figuring out, okay, I guess he is a Sangoma. And he goes and lives with this lady who is like a grandmother type of Sangoma. And he's like learning from her a lot of spiritual practices, and you can see him kind of dancing and getting like the ancestral spirits to kind of enter him. You see his dancing. They mention this, that his dancing changes, his voice kind of changes. And when he does that, he's basically taking on, I guess, messages and different types of energies from ancestors. And I guess the part that kind of made me a little confused was kind of some conversation about how he wants to go to school and it's expensive, but it sounds like the place where he's practicing, doing these spiritual practices, or being called on by people in communities to kind of like do like healings and things. I guess he's trying to raise money to go to school or something. And I think they're trying to help him with getting back into school or something along those lines. That's the part that I was a little bit confused about. Like, he is a kid, he's pretty young, and he values education, he wants to go to school, but it sounds like he's either working towards being able to pay for education. That's the part that I'm like, I don't really know. If he's, I don't know if people are using him. I really don't understand. I don't really know. I don't know if he's generating some kind of money. Do people pay or tip? Like, how do they get someone to come to them? So, like, say if somebody needed healing, how do you get someone to come to you? How do you get someone to come heal someone in your family? Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be like physical, it could be mental, emotional, all kinds of healing. And they participate, this boy is participating in this. Usually, I guess people aren't that young when they're practicing, but there are ways that they can kind of tell. I think there's like something with dreams and ancestors speaking to people. And this is a very different way of thinking. When you think about like the Judeo-Christian kind of way of thinking about who to call on. Now in the Bele culture and Zulu culture, it's not that people don't believe in like a higher power or a god or a creator. The Sangomas are like spiritual people, but it's just a different form to try to get healing. And so, yeah, like when you think about, the Judeo-Christian kind of Western religions, like what is usually taught? Like usually people have this concept that they talk about the state of the dead. Depending, we can go in so many different directions with this, but depending, some people use verses from the Bible that say like the dead know nothing and things like that, to say once somebody's dead, they're dead. Once somebody's gone, they're not communicating. And there's also this idea of the second coming of Jesus, or even a Messiah that comes, or at some point, it depends if you're Jewish or Christian or whatever, but Jews believe there isn't a Messiah yet, and when the Messiah comes, things on earth are going to be better. And I guess Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah who already came, and everyone, I think, kind of believes that there's going to be someone coming that's going to take the dead, and to take the people who are living. Like, there's usually some concept of heaven involved in, like, the Judeo-Christian realm, and people are basically waiting for someone to either come back or to come for the first time and fix everything. And the dead eventually at some point will be risen, and the people who are living will be taken to heaven, whatever, all the details in between. I'm trying not even to go into all that, but that's just a general, right? So I do think that to some extent, in the Judeo-Christian world, people do believe that people can be raised from the dead. Or will be, that somebody can have a role in raising people from the dead. It's a bit of a taboo subject. It's kind of weird in like the modern Western world to even like say stuff like that. Like it's not common. But one thing that I do notice that's kind of interesting in religious and non-religious circles alike is that when it comes to things like ghost hunting, or kind of talking to spirits, Ouija boards, kind of interacting with some kind of haunted thing, I was watching these podcast episodes. One was by Joe Rogan interviewing Sam and Colby, these kind of like ghost hunters, these Caucasian guys from, I think, Kansas. I think they live in LA now. They have for a while. I think they're popular on YouTube. They're pretty young. I think they're Gen Zers. And they were also just on Iced Coffee Hour. That's how I learned that they had been on Joe Rogan. So I watched the episode on the Joe Rogan Experience, and then I watched the episode on Iced Coffee Hour. And they were talking about, haunted places that are popular, like the Queen Mary. They had like a really wild experience. I'm not going to spoil it, but I think it's probably on their YouTube channel, that somebody had audio recorded. They had a couple Christian friends, really Christian friends that they lived with, that came with them, and they were in this room, and they were basically interacting with some kind of spirit of some kind that was, responding to them by like knocking in different directions. And they were asking it questions, and they asked the question about like heaven, like, is there heaven? And then the way that it knocked, it said no. And then the Christians got, scared and left, because they're like, well, if something says that that you're not, that there's no heaven, then I guess in their belief, they were taught that means that it's a demon that's saying that, and you shouldn't talk to demons, kind of thing. And so, I mean, Sam and Colby, I don't even know if they're Christian. I think there's came from some kind of Christian background, but a lot of people gravitate towards that kind of content. they don't have to be Christian to be watching that. And it can be atheist people, agnostic people, people of all kinds of religions, have this kind of interest or fascination. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying there is this kind of, people want to know, what did other people experience? And that's something that me and some of my friends, we talk about that a lot. And it's kind of one of those topics that we notice it's taboo, like don't start talking about flat earth. Don't start talking about aliens or religion. Don't start talking about, ghosts and hauntings and stuff like that. But it is something that I do like to know about people, is like, have you had any kind of experiences, that are unexplained by science or logic, and some people are open to talking about it, and some people just like, oh, that's too weird to talk about, and they think it's super awkward, and then they don't really want to talk about it. So I don't really bring it up that much anymore. But usually when I first meet people, not like the first day, but after a while, I'm like, that's a good thing to know about people, is kind of where they stand on that kind of stuff. But a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They get uncomfortable. But I don't know, I think there's value in those conversations. And, I just find it interesting that, I do know that the Christian religion is pretty against that kind of stuff, but I find it very interesting that so many people from so many cultures kind of have this kind of idea about ghosts or like the dead or ancestors. They don't usually say like, oh, ancestors. A lot of people are like contacting any dead person. Like, it's not always a specific person they know. It's like those guys, Sam and Colby, like, who knows what was in the Queen Mary? Like, who knows what it was or who they were talking to? Like, I think that is different, just interacting with any kind of spirits versus interacting with your own, people who have like a shared bloodline. So I don't know, it's just kind of a taboo topic though, because it's like there is that kind of mixed message. People say stay away from it, but it's like, but then you see stories in like the New Testament about like Jesus raising the dead, raising his friend Lazarus from the dead, and healing a lot of people. Like, people can look at stuff and be like, oh, like, like talking to demons is wrong, or like having anything to do with like the dead is like wrong, or like these types of healing practices that all these traditional people use are wrong. But then if you look at Jesus, it's like, well, if the stories about Jesus are accurate, he was healing people, he was talking to demons, to come out of people, he was, raising people from the dead. I mean, in that culture, when people are dead, you're not supposed to be like around them. In that time period, like, it was like a taboo. You weren't supposed to be like around the dead. You weren't supposed to be around the demon-possessed people. So even getting to a place to raise people from the dead or to heal them would have technically been against the rules to be like around those people. But people look at Jesus and they don't say like, oh, he's like some kind of witch doctor or something. Like, nobody would say that about Jesus. But when people see like, oh, there's people in African countries or Asian countries or, Latin American countries that like communicate with ancestors and talk to all these spirits and things, and or whatever they are that's interacting, people get, they don't like it. They're like, it's evil, it's bad. And people can say, okay, we can't compare ourselves to Jesus, we're not Jesus. But I mean, his disciples, you know, they were trying to do the same types of healing. And he didn't discourage it. He didn't say, no, 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 you're not Jesus. You're not allowed. He explained that one time that there's a certain type of demon that only can come out through prayer and fasting. And that's why they couldn't take the demon out of someone, why the disciples couldn't remove the demon. He wasn't saying don't talk to it, don't interact with it. It's kind of an interesting thing, though, in like the Christian world, how things are very far away from, like, you know, the otherworldly spiritual stuff. Like, people don't talk about miracles. People don't talk about, you know, fasting. People don't really talk about, I mean, I'm not saying people should be like bragging it up, but I'm just saying, like, these are almost taboo topics. But then it's kind of like you go back and, like, I always like to compare to, like, the New Testament Jesus stories, because those are usually the people, honestly, it's usually the Christians that are so against all the other types of religions, because they're taught every single thing is evil. If it's not Christianity, it's evil. But then it's like there's so much overlap. Like, when your mind is open to seeing it, there's so much overlap. Like, I guess the difference between Jesus, you know, taking a demon out of somebody, and a healer, a different religious healer, what's the difference? You know, if you see someone that's, you know, a traditional healer, and they're removing a demon from somebody, or a bad spirit, or whatever it is, and they're doing some kind of religious ritual to remove it, and they're able to remove it, and then you read in the Bible that there's, like, you know, Jesus having, like, these back and forth conversations with demons and stuff who know him by name and all this kind of stuff. And the disciples trying to, like, take demons out of people. Like, what's the difference? Like, what is the difference? Like, some people would say, okay, well, those people were giving glory to God. I don't know if people who are traditionalists, who aren't Christians, like, if they credit God to, you know, because they do believe in a God. Like, do they credit that creator to removing the demon, or do they credit the Sangoma for the healing process? Maybe that is the difference. But in Christianity, it's kind of the same. Like, people credit Jesus for doing that. They say Jesus did it. And then there's this whole argument. Is he a man? Is he divine? Is he both? And that's a whole other conversation for a whole other time that I probably won't. I don't see myself at the moment going into it, but I think we might eventually get there. I did do all those episodes about those councils. There's a lot of that information in those, and when you study those councils, there's a lot of information about the arguments about the divinity of Jesus in the early church. People trying to decide, is he divine, is he not? So, I mean, I'm not trying to, like, only talk about Christianity, but I just feel like, you know, there can be some ridicule from that end. But it's kind of like, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, a lot of these cultures are doing the same things. And it's taboo in our modern culture anyways. Like, if somebody was raising the dead, even if it was like a Christian doing it, people would be like, what's going on? Or if somebody was, like, healing people or taking out demons and actively, like, talking about it on the internet, like, I mean, that would come off weird. And so, like, it's just not a conversation that people have too much today. But I think people are more open-minded to, like, haunted places, spirits that are kind of not, like, necessarily ancestral spirits, but, like, just talking to the dead of any kind, or trying to, like, interact with it, whether it's ghosts or spirits or demons or whatever it is. I don't really know, but whatever it is that people are interacting with, people seem very interested in the topics. And so, you know, I do see a lot of overlap with those types of practices and interests in modern society. Just, it's kind of more, it's less taboo to be like, okay, it's like near Halloween, let's play with the Ouija board, or like, you know, let's go to the Queen Mary and see what happens there. Let's go to, I know in San Diego there's the Whaley House. I've been to that. I've been to the Queen Mary as well. And it's easier to be like, get a group of your friends, go to the Whaley House. You know, there's a graveyard like right next door. I wasn't really comfortable hanging out there, but some of my friends were. And people who would like never go to church, they'd never go to temple, and they're also like really weirded out by like maybe African traditions and like people interacting with ancestors, but they'll go to the Whaley House, you know, and hang out there and go on the tour and hear the stories and talk about hauntings and stuff like that. That is kind of like what's culturally acceptable nowadays. I think to do it as like an experiment is more culturally acceptable. If you're doing it as like a religious practice, people consider that like some ancient old thing that like people don't really do that anymore. And if you do, it's not very close to what Jews and Christians do, so it's probably not right. So people just dismiss it. But I do notice that there is this interest in, you know, in spirits. So, it's just kind of interesting to see that overlap, how there is the interest there, but people kind of interpret it differently depending where it's coming from. So talking about something like Sangomas, there's going to be plenty of people that are like, oh, this is like some evil witchcraft kind of like thing that like is bad and terrible, but I can go watch some ghost hunter show, and that's acceptable. To watch these people interacting with those ghosts, that's fine, you know. But I don't really see the difference. I mean, I guess the difference mainly is when people are doing it purposefully for like a type of healing versus when somebody's doing it to like experiment with it. That's the main difference. But other than like the reasoning behind it, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. Not really the same. Like, it comes from different places. Your heart's in a different place. But I don't see it as I don't see it as that far out of the norm from what people do. It is just kind of taboo. People don't really talk about it. But I've met a lot of people that are into talking about like haunted stuff and like experimenting around like different types of things. And yeah, these are people in LA, people in San Diego. I mean, modern thinking people, you know, like, so there is that interest there. But, you know, I know when we talk about like traditionalists, African traditionalists and things like that, like right away, like a lot of us were probably taught like, oh, that kind of stuff, it doesn't matter if it's from Africa or where, that kind of stuff is evil. But I don't know, like sometimes when I look at like the people who say it's evil, it's like they don't really look at like the history of the church and see kind of what people were doing back then. It's like these people were kind of doing the same sort of things. It's just not something that we practice modern now. Like in like a lot of Western modern society, people don't really, mess with that kind of stuff at all. So that's kind of mostly what I have to say about it. I'll try and post a video if I can find it. I think I watched it like a week ago. But we'll see, guys. But I hope this was interesting. And that's it for now.